Hey, welcome back to How I Built This from NPR. I'm Guy Raz. So it's 1987, and Howard Schultz has just bought Starbucks, which had about 6 stores at the time. And he had this grand vision of expanding all across the country fast. But gourmet coffee shops weren't all over cities like they are today. And the idea of hanging out in one for hours, or working in one, or catching up with friends, just passing the time, that was kind of weird. And so when Howard started sharing his vision of rolling out these coffee stores from coast to coast, lots of people were like, Howard, that's a crazy idea.
Well, a lot of people said that, but we believed early on that what we had seen in Italy was replicable in America through an American lens. It was thinking, let's create a store that not only is a store for coffee, but produces this sense of community between home and work. And I think early on we realized that the brand we were about to build was going to be experiential.
I mean, how did Starbucks do in the first few years after you bought it? Because you weren't profitable right away, right?
No, we weren't profitable, but in order to grow the company and to raise the money, we said, kind of metaphorically, we want to build a 100-story skyscraper. Well, we're going to have to invest to build the foundation. So we started investing heavily, like any other startup, in people, in processes, in IT, in infrastructure. And so the company lost money almost from the day I bought it.
Yeah.
And investors, I think, understood early on that we were going to lose money in order to build a much bigger company.
As you begin to expand and grow beyond the Pacific Northwest, and I think your first location was in Chicago, what was the secret? I mean, was it building a narrative around Starbucks, around the beans, around the farmers, around the story of coffee? Is that how you were able to bring people into the stores?
Well, first off, we did go to Chicago as our first city outside of Northwest, and it did not work right away. So
why not?
I got fooled very easily because I selected that location in the summer. And then when the winter came, it did not have an interior entrance into the building that it was in. So the customers had to walk out of the building in the cold winter of Chicago to get to Starbucks. And you know what? They didn't do it.
Wow.
But we didn't have any extra resources for traditional advertising or marketing. We did none of that. And even today, Starbucks is not a traditional marketing company. I mean, it sounds really old-fashioned, but we built the company one customer at a time, one cup at a time. And I think we got a lot of positive PR about the equity of the brand, the experience, and people started anticipating that we would come to their city. And probably the best example of that is what happened when we opened, now I'm going to fast forward, in 1996 when we opened in Tokyo in Japan for the first time.
What happened there?
So no one at Starbucks had any international experience. No one. And we told our board we're going to open up, we think, in Japan. So first the board said we should probably hire an outside resource, a consultant, a word that really gives me hives. If we have to hire a consultant, it means that we don't really know our business. And they went away and they produced this big report. And before they presented it to the board, they gave me the bad news and said, Japan will be a disaster. You can't go there. So Starbucks' no smoking policy will not work. And no person in the entire country will ever eat or drink in the street because you will lose space. And the unit economics of real estate, you can't sell enough coffee in Japan to pay for the rent. And I convinced the board that I believed that Japan would work.
Just based on what? On instinct? On a guess?
I just knew. I mean, I just felt we had to have the courage of our convictions. If we're going to be a national and a global company, we have to go somewhere, and Japan had a direct flight from Seattle.
Perfect.
Okay, so we make the mistake of opening up our first store in the middle of August in Tokyo. So if those of you who have been to Japan in August,
It's hot.
the humidity is 100%. It's 95 degrees. You're in the street for 5 minutes and you need a shower. And we didn't have any cold coffee or Frappuccino at that time, nothing like that.
Yeah.
It was hot coffee.
Yeah.
So the night before, there's kind of a celebratory dinner with our Japanese partner, and there's an interpreter, and I'm thinking, tomorrow's just not going to go well. I can just feel it. It's going to be a problem. So I tell the partner through the interpreter that I think you should expect, since it's so warm, it's not going to be a big opening. So just anticipate the fact that we're going to have to build this business and wait for the cold weather. And the interpreter was afraid to tell him what I said.
Wow.
And I find out 10 minutes later that the interpreter said, Mr. Schultz said it's going to be the biggest Starbucks opening ever. I think, did you really do that? So I get to my hotel room and I get a call from someone in Seattle who's ecstatic saying, we got CNN to cover the opening live.
Oh, wow.
And I'm dying. You know, I mean, this is it. At 6 a.m. in the morning, we're driving up to the store. And there's a lineup of hundreds of Japanese people on the street.
Wow.
And I turn to the same interpreter and I say, did you hire extras? And of course, no. And we cut the ribbon, and a young Japanese college student who slept overnight runs to the front of the line, and we follow him, and he says, double tall latte.
What's so crazy to me is that as you're expanding in the early 90s, none of these huge players in coffee like Nestle or the other companies got into that game. I mean, they could have crushed you if they wanted to do what you did. Why didn't they see that opportunity?
I've been asked that many times. I think the large companies just never believed that you could build a national company and brand around selling coffee in the cup. I just think they were naive, maybe arrogant, and they gave us a lot of runway.
You guys started to do all kinds of branding partnerships in the 90s with ice cream makers, with supermarkets, bottled Frappuccino, candy companies, record companies. Were you ever worried that you were diluting the brand?
We were very disciplined. We did a lot of things, but we turned down hundreds of things that people wanted to do with us. And I think what we were trying to say was, will our customers give us license to sell coffee? I remember this was a huge decision back then as to whether Starbucks should be in Costco and discount the coffee.
Right.
It was a great debate inside the company because how could you sell it at Costco at a discount to your stores? And that what happened was we introduced hundreds of thousands of people at Starbucks who'd never been in a store. Bottled Frappuccino and a JV with Pepsi became a multi-billion-dollar business. And we started believing that we could build a brand in our store and then extend it into another form factor in the grocery store. And we also learned that many people got introduced to Starbucks through bottled Frappuccino.
I guess around age 47, 48, you stepped down for the first time as CEO. The company at that point is doing $2 billion in revenue. You're pushing more stores outside the U.S. Why did you step down?
I felt like I was repeating myself. I felt I was no longer engaged in the fun, creative part of the business is where I get the most joy.
What were you doing? What were you focused on?
Between the lawyers, the HR issues.
It was less joyful?
I was not having fun. I just decided that I needed a break from the madness of it.
And were you able to really step away?
Yeah, I did step away. I was the chairman of the company, and as chairman, I should have been paying kind of more attention to the company, but I started doing other things.
One of which was the Seattle Supersonics, which we can talk about or not.
I think we're going to leave that one. Yeah, I'm not proud of that.
You wrote a famous memo to the board in, I guess, 2007, where you expressed regret over the commoditization of the brand. What was going on?
There was two things going on at that point. First off, the country was heading into a cataclysmic financial crisis. But I think, as I look back on those years, I would describe it as the years of hubris. That Starbucks was growing at a pace in which growth and success began to cover up a lot of mistakes. And
Like what kind of mistakes?
too many stores cannibalizing other stores. The financial controls and discipline that were in place were not being leveraged. And I think the big mistake, though, was Wall Street and the stock price became an albatross on the company's neck. And so growth became the strategy of the company, and growth is not a strategy.
And growth meant what? That
Hyper-
customer service wasn't as good, that the product wasn't as
Yeah.
good, that the experience of going to a Starbucks wasn't as good?
No, two things. Growth meant too many stores too fast in areas that should not have had a Starbucks. And secondarily, the experience, which had defined the essence of the company, was being compromised by efficiency. And the company and the management team at that time started measuring yield, sales per hour, and doing things that were so dilutive to the essence of the foundation of the company. And it really started, I think, upsetting me. And I began to go into the stores and not recognize what we had built.
What did you see?
Probably the signature thing that I saw was a new breakfast sandwich that contaminated the odor of coffee.
This was the grilled cheese sandwich?
And not that it was a wrong thing to do, but it was executed so poorly.
Like the Starbucks smelled like cheese?
Yeah.
Right.
Like burnt cheese.
Around 2008, Starbucks share price hits a record low. Some analysts were saying its days were numbered. Were they really?
At the time, I didn't think so, but I knew we were in a downward spiral, and the company needed to go through a major transformation. And when I returned as CEO, which I never had planned to come back, I would say that there were people both on the board at the time and many people at Starbucks, and certainly hundreds of people at Wall Street, that said, "You're bringing him back?" I mean, he's the problem.
Really?
And the analysts and the media were not very kind. But when I came back for two reasons, and that is what it means to love something and the responsibility that goes with it.
When you told your wife, Sherry, that you were going to do this, what was her response? I mean,
100% supportive. I mean, she went through the same pain I was going through in watching what we had built,
yeah.
and knew I had to go back.
You were gone from running it for almost 8 years.
Yeah.
Did you think you were just going to go in, quickly stabilize it, and then go back out?
I don't think I knew how long I would stay at that point. But I think, as we discussed earlier, the problems were so severe, and every rock that I turned over was worse than I had imagined, to the point where I made some very drastic decisions.
You had to shut 600 stores?
We closed 900 stores, and 90% of them had been open less than a year.
Wow.
The thing that I did that was probably most telling was when we decided to close the stores for training. At 12 o'clock, every store in America was closed for retraining.
How much did that cost Starbucks?
I think we estimated about $24 million that day in terms of lost sales and labor.
So your board just loved this. Your shareholders loved this.
Well, there were two things that I did that people said, he's really lost it. But the training was so vitally important because Starbucks Coffee Company forgot how to make quality coffee. And we had everybody in the company retrained. Now, the thing that galvanized the entire company was something else. And that was, we were in a room one day and I said, I feel like I need to communicate with every single store manager in person. And this was in 2008. This is during the crisis where no company was traveling, and they said, well, you can't get 10,000 people in a room, what are you going to do? And I said, no, I want to go somewhere where we can get 10,000 store managers in a an arena. And they said, what are you talking about? By the way, this event cost about $30 million at a time when we didn't have the money. You know, fly everybody there, the food, everything. And so I had to give a $30 million speech.
Yeah.
This was, you know, to 10,000 store managers. And I'm writing some notes, and a couple hours before, some of my colleagues say, well, what are you going to tell them?
Yeah.
I said, I'm going to tell them the truth, the real truth. Because at this point, I knew we were really in trouble. I knew that we had about 7 months left if we continued on this track where we would be insolvable.
Wow.
And I felt so strongly that I needed to trust our people with the same information I had. And if I was going to ask them to do the things that they needed to do, which meant take every single customer interaction so personally, as if this is your store, and make it so personal to understand if we don't correct this situation, we are not going to be able to feed your families.
And you said that
I said
on
that.
stage?
Yeah.
How long did it take to recover?
Overnight, we began to change the trajectory, and within 6 months, we were starting to climb back. And within a year, it was a memory. However, the real question was, what did we learn? We were so hungry and so driven when we started the company. But when we were that successful, people got sloppy, they got lazy, and this is so vitally important. Success in any business, no matter what it is not an entitlement. It has to be earned.
Yeah.
And we stopped earning it. And that's why we got in trouble. You know, building a company is a lonely place sometimes because you're imprinted, especially as a man, of not demonstrating vulnerability. And I think one of the perhaps most undervalued characteristics of leadership is vulnerability and asking for help. And I've done that a number of times. So, and I think it's important. I think when you're vulnerable and you ask for help, people come towards you. And I think I've tried to do that every step of the way and be honest and truthful about what I know, what I don't, and most importantly, what I believe.
Howard, I want to ask you about your approach to your employees. You call them partners. They're eligible for health care, education benefits. You can now earn a degree through Arizona State University.
Yeah.
If you work at Starbucks, at least 20 hours a week.
Free college tuition.
All of this is very expensive, but it does buy you a lot of goodwill from the public and from your employees. Is that why Starbucks does this?
You know the answer to that. No. The health insurance, the equity in the form of stock options, trying to prove something to myself, to my family, and many of us who were in the company were not born with a silver spoon. Many of us had come from similar backgrounds. And I think customers began to realize we're paying these kids, we're giving them ownership. They have health insurance. And the intimacy that was built between the barista and our customers because of the frequency began to build.
Because you had less turnover?
We had much less turnover then and today than anyone in our industry.
Howard, my dad is in the audience tonight here. He flew up from LA to be here.
Yeah.
What do you... Thank you, it's my dad. What do you think your dad would have made of your success? I mean, if he was sitting in this audience tonight and he was hearing your story, what do you think he would have thought about his son who became one of the most successful entrepreneurs in modern American history?
My dad passed away in '87 at the age of 65. So he didn't see any of the success that we have enjoyed. I think he would be so shell-shocked and so proud. And I think he would go back to what he experienced. And I think what he would be most proud of is how we have treated everyone in the company, because he was that blue-collar worker who was not respected for a lack of education and not being sophisticated, and unfortunately never really got the chance to be himself or be valued in a company, he would marvel at that. In many, many ways, and I've said this before, the values, the culture, and guiding principles of Starbucks really are defined by me wanting to build the kind of company that my father never got a chance to work for.
Howard, thank you so much
You're welcome.
for being here.
Thank you.
Really incredible. Howard Schultz, he stepped down as CEO of Starbucks earlier this year.